Hi folks and welcome to TK Power Sports. When you bring home a brand new ATV or side-by-side, something like this 2024 Yamaha YXZ, one of the most important things you can pay attention to is the break-in period. Now every manufacturer has a recommendation for how to break in their vehicles, and that's what we're going to go over in this video. And we'll also talk about, well, is it even important to do a break-in? Let's get into it right now. The first question we want to answer is, why should you do a break-in? And I'm going to use this YXZ for reference because Yamaha does explain it. So first of all, that's the 998cc triple cylinder engine that powers this YXZ. Now Yamaha says that the break-in on this machine is from 0 to 15 hours, and we'll go over more of the details, but they go on to say that the break-in is crucial because the various parts in the engine wear and polish themselves to achieve the correct operating clearances. Essentially, this engine is not straight out of the box ready to deliver its maximum performance. That's why a break-in is important. And yeah, if you want an answer to that question, is breaking in your machine even important? My simple answer is that every single manufacturer has recommendations for a break-in period in the owner's manual. If it wasn't important, they wouldn't talk about it. Now, each one is different and they vary wildly. Some brands it's a very short break-in, some brands it's a large break-in, and those are the details I want to get into right now. But yes, overall, a break-in period is absolutely important to make sure your vehicle lasts as long as it can and delivers the best performance. Now we're going to go brand by brand, and we'll start with this Yamaha YXZ because it's the one I have right in front of me. And the actual details for the YXZ are pretty detailed. I also pulled the details on a Yamaha Viking, and they're similar, but not the exact same. So first of all, we'll go over the YXZ. So during the break-in period, prolonged full throttle operation or any condition that might result in excessive heating must be avoided. So that's pretty much standard at every brand. Here's the part that's different. Yamaha says, however, momentary, that's 2 to 3 seconds maximum, full throttle operation under load will not harm the engine and in fact will help with the break-in. Now, some people will argue for this, that's called a hard break-in, where you have some of those full throttle moments, and some brands say you should never do it. So that is an interesting difference. Yamaha says to do it. Now, here's the thing with the YXZ that's sort of different. They list 0 to 8 hours, avoid prolonged operation above 5,300 RPM, and allow a cooling off period of 5 to 10 minutes every hour of operation. And then from 8 to 15 hours, Yamaha says to avoid prolonged operation above 6,300 RPM. So they actually give you specific time ranges and RPM ranges. I mentioned the Yamaha Viking. I pulled that up as well. The Viking's more general. It's 0 to 20 hours is a full break-in, so that's interesting. But they don't go into the detail of what the RPM should be at what time. They just basically say, don't do the prolonged full throttle operation. So yes, this also proves that not every brand is even the same. You have to look at your machine specifically for whatever that company says to do. And you know what? The engineers that make these machines, they know them the best. So I absolutely trust that they're doing what's proper for each individual machine. Now on to the next brand. We just got a CanAm Commander, which we tested here on the channel, and that was also brand new, so we had to break it in. So now let's go over what they say, and what's interesting here, I looked up 3 different units, and the break-in period instructions are all the exact same. They don't vary. I looked up the Defender, the Commander, and the Maverick R, and yeah, it's all the same process. So CanAm says that during the break-in period, avoid full throttle operation, avoid pressing the accelerator pedal more than 3/4 of the stroke, avoid sustained accelerations, and avoid prolonged cruising speeds. The break-in period of 10 operating hours or 300 kilometers, that's 200 miles, is required for this vehicle. So again, that's all pretty standard. They don't recommend the hard break-in though. They say never above 3/4 throttle. Now there's one section Can-Am has that Yamaha didn't, and that is on the brakes. Because yes, you also need to break in the brakes. So Can-Am says, new brakes will not operate at their maximum efficiency until their break-in is completed. Braking performance may be reduced, so use extra caution. Use moderate force for the first 40 to 50 brake applications. So that's essentially the break-in period. For the first 40 to 50 presses, you never go that hard on it. And then Can-Am also talks about the belt, because of course a belt needs to be broken in. Now this YXZ doesn't have a belt, so of course they didn't mention it. Can-Am does though. A new belt requires a break-in period of 50 kilometers, that's 30 miles. During the break-in period, avoid strong acceleration and deceleration, avoid pulling a load, and avoid high-speed cruising. So some interesting differences there, sort of Can-Am to Yamaha, and now let's look at Polaris. I looked up the break-in details on the Razor XP1000. Once again, if you're going to buy a Polaris, they offer so many different models. Look up your specific machine, but let me go over now what they say for that Razor. And again, there's some really interesting differences, stuff that Polaris talks about that no one else really does. So first of all, they talk about the drivetrain break-in. So Polaris says, fill the fuel tank with the recommended fuel, make sure you check the oil level, avoid aggressive use of the brakes, vary your throttle position, do not operate at a sustained idle, perform regular checks on the fluid levels, carry only light loads, and then they also say during the break-in period, change both the oil and the filter at 25 hours, 1 month, or 500 miles, whichever one comes first. So that's, again, an interesting difference. No one else talked about that oil change. Now, they also say there's a brake system break-in. Apply only moderate braking force for the first 50 stops. And then another thing that Polaris talks about is brake burnishing. So let me read this to you, the process of brake burnishing. It is recommended that a burnishing procedure be performed on a new vehicle or after installation of new brake pads or rotors. This helps to conform the pads to the rotor surface and achieve optimum braking performance. Test drive the machine, gradually accelerate to more than 20 miles per hour, apply light to moderate pressure to the brake pedal to slow the vehicle to roughly 5 miles per hour, and then repeat this process 10 to 30 times, allowing 30 seconds between brake applications for the system to cool down. So that's sort of what the other brands were getting at, saying, no hard braking, just moderate force. But Polaris really goes into detail on that brake burnishing process to make sure that the pads and the rotors sort of seat themselves to each other. That is pretty interesting. Now, going on, they also talk about a belt break-in. A proper break-in of the clutches and drive belt will ensure a longer life. If a belt fails, always clean the debris from the duct and from the engine compartment. The break-in there is drive at slower speeds for the first 50 miles of operation, carry only light loads, avoid aggressive acceleration. We've been through that stuff. Now here's the one last interesting difference with this Razor XP1000. Polaris lists a standard break-in, which I just talked about, or a sand/dune break-in. Now for that, they say, drive in low gear for the first 5 miles of operation. Avoid prolonged low-speed operation at high throttle. Avoid aggressive acceleration, high-speed operation, and prolonged operation at a specific RPM. So essentially, yeah, just start in low gear for those first 5 miles, and apparently that's going to break it in more for the sand and the dunes. So there's another interesting difference, and Polaris is the only brand that has sort of a different procedure for the riding environment you're going to be in. Next up, let's talk about Honda, and this has to be the least detailed break-in procedure according to the owner's manual. And again, it's the exact same break-in procedure for a Honda Talon as it is for a Pioneer 1000, because I looked up both and it's the same little blurb. I'll read it to you. Help assure your Honda side-by-side's future reliability and performance by paying extra attention to how you drive during the first operating day or 15 miles. During this period, avoid full throttle starts and rapid acceleration. And that is it. That's all Honda says for break-in. So yes, just 1 day or 15 miles of operation. I don't know if this is a difference in manufacturing, that their process is so different, but as a consumer, I actually do appreciate that because it's just less that you have to do, less time you have to spend. And according to Honda, that is enough to make sure you're properly broken in. Next up is Arctic Cat, and I looked up the break-in procedure for the Wildcat XX. It's fairly similar to the other brands. Arctic Cat says, during the first 10 hours of operation, always use less than half throttle. Varying the engine RPM during the break-in allows the components to load, which is aiding the engine and transmission component mating process, and then unload, that's allowing the components to cool. Although it is essential to place some stress on the engine, care should be taken not to overload the engine. Now, when the engine starts, allow it to warm up properly. Idle the engine for several minutes until it's reached normal operating temperatures, but do not idle the engine for excessively long periods of time. Then Arctic Cat also has a brake burnishing process. They say, just like Polaris, accelerate to 30 miles per hour, release the accelerator pedal, press the brake pedal to decelerate to between 0 and 5 miles per hour, and then repeat the procedure 20 times. Finally, Arctic Cat does mention the belt break-in as well. They say a new drive belt requires a break-in period of about 25 miles. So drive the vehicle for the first 25 miles at 3/4 throttle or less. And that's funny because just earlier they said never go over half throttle. So they're contradicting themselves here, but they're specifically talking about a new belt, which you could put on after the engine is broken in. Anyways, drive the vehicle for 25 miles at 3/4 throttle or less, and do not exceed 40 miles per hour during the belt break-in process. And another word I'll add here is, and this might seem obvious, but every belt will also have a different break-in process. So if you do purchase a new belt, don't just trust Arctic Cat. Go look at what the belt manufacturer says the break-in process should be. And finally, we come to Kawasaki. They're probably right in the middle of these brands with how much information they provide. Let me read it to you. So I looked up the break-in for the Mule Pro FX and the KRX 1000, and they're essentially the exact same. So for the KRX, Kawasaki says the first 20 hours or 200 kilometers of vehicle operation is the designated break-in period. Do not exceed half throttle during break-in. If the vehicle is not used carefully during this period, you may end up with a broken down instead of broken in vehicle. Clever there, Kawasaki. They say, do not start moving or race the engine immediately after starting, even if it's warm. Do not race the engine while in neutral. And then finally, they say it is important to perform the initial service after the first 20 hours or 200 kilometers. So there you go. Again, so many differences from brand to brand on what you should do for break-in. So I'll come back to the point I keep saying, look up your own information on your machine, because even within a company, each model can be different. But at the end of this, I hope you realize a break-in is incredibly important on these machines. Every brand says so. So why wouldn't you follow it? If you buy something that's brand spanking new, spend the time and do the break-in properly, and then you'll feel good about getting out there and hitting the trails. Because if you do have a problem, you don't want to be second guess. Oh man, if I had done that break-in, maybe this wouldn't have happened. You don't want to deal with that. So get out there and break in your machines. Well, folks, that is it for this video. Now, of course, I want to hear from you. Go in the comments. Let me know, did you break in your machine when you bought it? It's more interesting to hear if you didn't do it. Have you had any problems with that machine? I would love to hear your stories. So go in the comments. Let me know everything you have ever done for a break-in. While you're down there, don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, hit join to become a member of TK Power Sports, and then come right back here to the channel to see what we're testing next. See you.